Welcome to Margin Points. Today, we're going to be looking at the working drafts for today's essays. We've got three topics that we're diving in on, anything from AI to the NICs, and we're going to be going a little bit deeper into some of the things that we're considering putting into today's essays and working through that process so you can kind of see things as they actually come together. Of course, like always, you'll be able to read the end of day essays as they're completed, and you can check them out either on marginpoints.com or on Substack. But let's dive right in. One of the big topics from this weekend in tech and AI was the limitation of Anthropic's Fable model, which we had talked about pretty extensively last week, and that being rolled back because of export restrictions now placed on that model. So right now, Fable 5, the leading kind of frontier model from Anthropic, is no longer available for use, and there's no real timeline on kind of seeing when that's going to be coming back. So that was a very interesting topic, just by virtue of seeming like a very significant change. We've always had access to kind of some of those frontier models from the bigger AI labs on a certain cadence and timeline. And what we noticed, obviously, with the Mythos and then Fable concept was that was really the first time where it was clearly a delay in getting that out. So that's really the topic for the first essay in looking at kind of Anthropic's frontier model with it. And I started to really think about where this could go in the consumer no longer having access to kind of a frontier model. And the natural first question is like, okay, well, what does this mean for Anthropic? What does this mean for their almost $1 trillion valuation? There's a lot of value at play with it. So obviously thinking through those aspects of it. And there, one of the things I thought back to pretty quickly was, how might they be able to get around this, right? How might they be able to think about, well, what's a different play here? What's a different way to kind of get value for it if you actually can't offer or there's a significant delay in offering kind of the frontier model? And that really being a pretty important part of the value proposition for these AI labs is that with open source stuff coming up behind them, they've really got to monetize on the frontier. That's what distinguishes them from it. And so started thinking a little bit about the previous acquisitions, like when Google didn't quite acquire, but basically acquired Windsurf, and as well when Meta didn't quite acquire Scale, but did kind of acquire Scale. There's no limit to human ingenuity in terms of how to get around some of these rules or kind of push them to their brink. And obviously with a lot of value at play here, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. But even just thinking through, okay, even if these export restrictions drop off in the next couple weeks, Anthropic could actually be fine never really selling the latest model to the public. They could lean into some of their partnerships. They've already had a joint venture with Blackstone, as well as with Goldman Sachs, I believe. And they have ways to kind of get the model out into other businesses and extract value, even if those businesses might not directly be using the model itself, right? So they could create these joint ventures. The joint ventures are able to ask the model certain questions, maybe in kind of a Chinese walled environment or safe environment with it, almost like this kind of all-knowing oracle concept with it that they can consult. And then the value is actually delivered to the business, even if somebody at the individual business, like let's say the roofing roll-up company that is keen to use AI and have that applied to them, does the owner or some of the operators at that business actually directly need to engage with the model? I don't think that that's clear that that's the case. It could be that you have any mix of forward deployed engineers, others kind of in the business, consultants, et cetera, that are providing a little bit of that interface and actually focusing in on the implementation. One of the things that's underpinning a lot of this thinking for me is actually just thinking about the distribution cycle for the technology, right? So if we kind of think back to the PC revolution or the smartphone revolution, physically people had to buy the product and go to a store, order it online. There's a delay. There was manufacturing. There's all of that sort of stuff. You don't have that with AI. The model can be available. It can deploy to millions of people immediately who are already using the product, and there's kind of an instant upgrade aspect to it, like kind of a software update on a Tesla, for example, has that same sort of dynamic. That implementation aspect of how to use in my business, that's not instant. And so there's maybe more of a services opportunity that actually opens up at that frontier. And not saying that this applies necessarily to all the different models, right? You can imagine Opus, Haiku, Sonnet, the other non-frontier models, let's say from OpenAI, from Anthropic, and to some extent as well from OpenAI. They could continue to be priced. They could continue to be kind of more accessible to the consumer, to the prosumer, but really allowing Anthropic and perhaps OpenAI to maximize value off of the latest frontier intelligence, I think necessarily involves charging a much higher price and something that's more commensurate with a business's willingness to pay on it. And I think this concept of it's too powerful, it needs to be limited, does actually fit pretty well for the marketing of such a service, of like, hey, help yourself to accelerate way past your competitors. It is kind of a natural dynamic with this as well. So that's kind of the first topic in there. And I'm really wrestling with, in some sense, whether this is going to be a shift that could just impact Anthropic, or is actually something that would touch on OpenAI as well, right? You kind of think that there's maybe a limitation or situation where OpenAI is not really incentivized to say, hey, our models aren't as capable. They can't do this advanced cybersecurity. They're going to want to present their models as being kind of equally capable, equally strong, and kind of set up with it. So I think there's a little bit of nuance there. But if this turns out to be a better economic model of delaying and capturing a higher willingness to pay, and then having other people come in afterwards or with limited access, I think you could see more adoption of this. This could also lead to more of a stratification of the models, where you have something that's kind of more focused of like, hey, this is focused for this industry, or this is really built around design. And I know the CEO of Airbnb was kind of talking, there's been rumors about starting an AI lab that was just focused on design and UX. You might start to see some of that happen naturally from the foundation labs as it is, because it allows them to kind of, establish a better sense of willingness to pay, and also deliver maybe smaller models that are more purpose built towards that, or essentially kind of created by neutering the global behemoth, the frontier model that's too powerful for folks to be able to use. So the other aspect that fell out of that news was the information, and I think others were reporting that the way that export ban came out to be was that the CEO of Amazon actually reported a lot of these concerns, the cybersecurity concerns, to the administration. And what's particularly interesting about that is just that Amazon is a major shareholder of Anthropic. So you have this kind of dynamic of like an investor snitching on a company that they own a significant portion of. I believe that's somewhere between 10 to 20%. It's believed that Amazon owns. So, seeing something like that happen is not the sort of thing that you see quite often. And so that got me thinking a little bit more just around the idea of ownership in it, and kind of getting what you're after or thinking about at the time. I think naturally you wouldn't think that a major investor in a company would do something that maybe was not in the benefit of that company that they had invested in. But when you start to stack up the amounts of money involved, it's pretty clear that for Amazon, Anthropic is still a relatively small investment. So Amazon's total market cap is about $2.6 trillion. Their stake in Anthropic would likely be in the maybe $200 billion range or so. So in any case, even if it was kind of maximized to full value, that's about 10% of the value. And it pales in comparison to the value that they have from AWS, which I think analysts, as I was reading this morning, typically are putting that in the roughly $1.3 trillion range is the value of just the AWS portion of Amazon's business. So I think that, even if they own the entirety of Anthropic, which is an interesting thought experiment, that's not something where they would necessarily even be incentivized to kind of think about, how do we put these, how do we kind of reconcile these two competing interests? One of our business lines just came out with a product that could take down or cause some sort of catastrophic issue for another one of our larger business lines. Okay, you're probably rectifying that without necessarily even going to the administration for it and kind of going through that process. But they still might have, even in that case, decided to self-report because it might have had less of an impact on the business overall than kind of an AWS catastrophe, especially in light of some of the thinking that we did in the first essay on, this actually giving Anthropic a lot of options in terms of how they bring this out and maybe continue to kind of commercialize off of it. So yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic where you can kind of put these blinders on and say, well, why would they do this? And, there's a lot of stuff online too that Amazon has a larger commercial relationship with OpenAI, Anthropic's kind of direct competitor. In that, I'm not sure that that's real equity ownership or there are other incentives kind of involved in that, and they're a large customer of AWS. So it starts to get very murky very quickly, and I think kind of a more facile interpretation of, a shareholder has done something that's really negatively, adversely affected one of their companies. That I think doesn't really tell the story here with it. And I also really ask, and I think this might be more of a core part of the essay as I put it together, is actually just looking at like what did Anthropic get out of this relationship to date, right? Like if this is kind of where its end state is, or certainly like a fraying of things. Look, I think it's pretty clear Amazon's not an enemy here of Anthropic, and they have a reason to care. This seems, pretty plausible, at least in how they were interpreting the threat to their business. With it, we can take that at face value for today. And, Anthropic was able to avoid taking kind of more obvious foreign or Middle Eastern money in a way that could have reflected, not as positively on their brand in the past. And they also likely prevented Amazon from a closer tie-up with OpenAI or the smaller labs like Cohere, Mistral, SSI, or Thinking Machines. So really, Anthropic has already gotten the value in that exchange for it, and everything that they kind of hoped for from Amazon. I think if you kind of go through the thought exercise of thinking, well, hey, if Amazon was a major shareholder in OpenAI, would some of these security concerns potentially be escalated even further, or there would be more of an issue around it as opposed to trying to work it out? And the information and others were reporting that there were meetings over the weekend on it with the administration, I believe, potentially, trying to resolve this. So I think all of those sorts of aspects are out there, and it does seem like Anthropic kind of got the value, but a very interesting quirk in this story to kind of see where the information came from in putting that together. Shifting from AI, our third topic is around the Knicks. Winning for the first time the NBA championship in 53 years. And had me thinking, there were a lot of actual cultural aspects to this that I was thinking about. One is, I think, there's obviously a story around the dominance of the New York media market and how it kind of plays out across the rest of the country. Like when you see something like that happen in New York. It feels like it's disproportionately powerful, and I do think that more of the story that I found myself gravitating towards was like this was actually more of a story around heritage brands and some of those bigger sports moments that can kind of break through, like when the Red Sox won for the first time in I don't even know how many years back in 2003. That was like a big cultural moment of that breakthrough. It was a big enough media market that it really mattered, but it was a clear kind of moment in breaking through. I'd say the Chicago Cubs, when they won, I believe in 2016, had a similar type of feel, and this is now, I guess, the next time for it. But it felt like a bigger story, and I think the New York media market was a big part of it. Looking at some of the other cultural aspects of what was coming through there, I saw Nike's ad really went viral, kind of celebrating the championship. It was directed by Josh Safdie, who was director for Uncut Gems. I think he did Marty Supreme as well. I'll check that before publishing. I was thinking we've written and seen before about Adidas in the London winning the London Marathon in under 2 hours with two of their runners and kind of breaking that record, and then coming out with the Chalamet, Beckham, who else was in that? Zidane as well, Del Piero, Jude Bellingham. Anyway, some of the top stars in a great 5-minute commercial for Adidas. And as we saw, there was kind of this like build up, this staccato of one beat for Adidas. Wow, under 2 hours in the marathon. Second beat. Wow, they just put you into this world with Chalamet, and they're basically kind of saying, hey, we're going to go win the World Cup. Like whatever other advertising is here, like we are going to kind of invest to win, and they might come out with something really interesting. But this was actually Nike's moment to break it from being that three-peat or those 3 beats kind of building on itself and really creating a narrative of like, wow, Adidas has arrived and look at everything they're doing. This was a moment where one heritage brand, the New York Knicks, could kind of create this opportunity for another heritage brand, Nike, to come in and say, hey, you know what? Like, we've been here all along too, and we're not going away either. And like, we've maybe got a heyday coming back with it. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting dichotomy of like those heritage brands helping each other. And that got me thinking a little bit more of who has that heritage gloss. Looking at NVIDIA in the past. So, Sequoia kind of gets credit for an investment in NVIDIA that they made in 1993 and apparently never sold, right? And it reminded me a little bit of seeing Spike Lee, who I think it's almost 40 years or so that he's been going, maybe even more, to the game, almost always there at Madison Square Gardens. Like, that's interesting, right? It's this kind of like rewarding of the consistency. The thesis didn't really change. Like they were there and kind of played that out. And I think there are certain businesses that while they might have fallen out of favor or might be in and out at any given point, like the Knicks were in the early 2000s era, kind of after Patrick Ewing, it felt like they were adrift and otherwise with it. And maybe there's been other times people with more knowledge of basketball would kind of have a better sense there. But here it's kind of like, okay, I was trying to think about, well, you've got, let's say, airlines, for example, you've got some of the automakers. Like I kind of think of an American Airlines, which today really is a 3rd or 4th place airline. I think pretty clearly in terms of market cap, falling behind Delta, who's the leader, falling behind United, valued, I believe, for less than Southwest Airlines, but has like a real heritage. I think even in the show Mad Men, they were featured in there. There's a clear heritage to that brand. It makes me think, okay, there's the possibility that they could be great again, and having more of that sort of upside option value, having been around for so long, and creating these kind of mixed generation or cross-generational experiences where you can kind of close your eyes and imagine, parents, grandparents flying on that airline, which is just a different aspect than like a Ryanair, let's say, would have, or otherwise. And I think there may be the Knicks winning kind of maybe shows you like maybe there's a little bit more hidden potential there for some of those brands like a GM or a Ford in there. Of course, you got to know what to do with it, and I think that was part of the lesson coming out of the Knicks was seeing, okay, well, how did that team get built? Jalen Brunson, Finals MVP, huge part of it. According to Charles Barkley, in his view, the greatest free agent signing in NBA history. Okay, so it's not like a New York Mets situation, who have the second highest payroll in baseball, and I think for a big chunk of the year, I'm not sure exactly where they are now, but they were not even close to 500. It's not just a money thing. You can't just spend, you got to spend smartly. So having one of the best free agent signings ever and putting together a team around that was cohesive. They also made a coaching change last year, even though they went very deep into the playoffs last year. So having the foresight of kind of thinking about that and putting that all together. I think there's a lot there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these heritage brands just fall into it. And I think looking at the Mets, looking at the Jets, you have to kind of realize there's got to be elements here that come together for winning. Maybe there are some parallels there that we can draw for businesses that might have some of that hidden heritage potential in coming together. So those are some of the working drafts and concepts that I'm working with for today's essays. 3 of them coming together. One of them spoken off of really the same news item. There's a couple things that I've also been tracking today that I decided not to write about. One was Intercom or Finn's acquisition by Salesforce. Interesting, and I'm just not sure that that's kind of a bigger trend in there. I might look at that a little bit more closely when the press releases and everything's kind of out to take a look at potentially for tomorrow. And I think otherwise I'm going to get back to writing and editing. And like I said, we will have these essays up at marginpoints.com. And if you subscribe on Substack, you'll see them right there on there too later today. And tomorrow I'll come back again. We'll be talking about tomorrow's working drafts and putting forward things for